Okay, folks, it is 10:02, so we will kick off. We're just waiting for our interpreter, Josephine, to come back on camera. But first and foremost, did want to thank everyone for your continued engagement on behalf of our community with this project. When this project went to the Board of Supervisors for its approval, our supervisor, Gordon Mar, was very insistent that the community involvement and engagement be a key criteria as we continue to work with all of the stakeholders on this project. It is our impression, at least my impression so far, that the community engagement that's been hosted by the proposed developer TNDC has been superficial at best. But the Mid-Sunset Neighborhood Association is doing its very best to ensure that our voices are heard, that the community engagement is not ignored, and that your concerns are both acknowledged, heard, and acted upon to the best of our abilities. So with that in mind, we will kick off today's conversation. We have a series of speakers who will address different aspects of this project, including alternatives, including toxicity concerns, including engagement with other members of the community. And what we would ask is that folks hold their questions until a designated time after every speaker, where we will address Q&A. The best way for you to ensure your question is acknowledged and heard is to raise your hand. So for those familiar with Zoom, it is under the reactions section of your Zoom, and there is a little bar that says raise hand. Once you raise your hand, I should be able to call on you, ask you to unmute yourself, address your question, and then the speaker will also provide their feedback to that specific question. For our audience who is more fluent in Chinese, we will also be taking questions on the Chinese channel. And we will be providing a simultaneous interpretation service today in Chinese. Our very, very capable interpreter, Josephine, will be leading that on the Chinese channel. For those folks who are using the interpretation function on Zoom, there is a little box at the very bottom of your screen that says interpretation. I would click on that box, select Chinese as your preferred language, and you will then be put into the Chinese channel. Josephine will now provide those instructions in Chinese as well. Josephine?
大家好，如果你需要中文翻譯嘅話，請你喺下部嘅一個圓球嘅符號，點擊嗰個地球符號，喺彈出嘅窗口嗰度選擇 language。Was I muted？如果你需要中文翻譯嘅話，請喺菜單下部圓球嘅符號點擊嗰個符號，喺彈出嘅菜單嗰度選擇 Language Interpretation， 再選擇中文。如果你係使用手機嘅話，請點擊菜單下部點點點嘅嗰個符號，喺彈出嘅菜單選擇 Language Interpretation， 再選擇中文。多謝。
Thank you very much, Josephine. Periodically, we will mute most of our audience members to prevent any sort of background noise, but we will call on speakers and folks who have questions to unmute themselves and raise their point. So if you are on mute, just be cognizant of that. But with no further ado, I'd like to introduce the president of the Mid-Sunset Neighborhood Association, Flo Kimmerling.
Hi. I'm so grateful that you're here. Thank you for coming and spending part of your Saturday morning with us. And I want to start out by giving you just a small roadmap of who is going to be talking and why you're here, really. You're here because we want to update you on everything since June 30th, when we last met. And we want to engage you. We feel it's extremely important that all of us be engaged at this point. Towards that end, Gordon Mar will speak first, our supervisor, and he has gone to bat for us and stood up for creating a compromise to the proposal for 2550 Irving at City Hall. And you will also hear about a timeline of what the board and the association has done and the contacts they have made and the efforts they have made since June 30th to come up with a compromise proposal for 2550 Irving. You will get an update on the toxins, on the tetrachloroethylene that is in the ground and the air, not only on 2550 Irving, but unfortunately in the surrounding area, and what has been done, what our approach is towards a remediation of this problem. And unfortunately, the developer's less than acceptable decision as to the remediation and what our response is to that. You will hear from Mr. Lenny Siegel, who's been so helpful to us, who is the director of the Center for Public Environmental Oversight, about the level of toxicity and what he proposes that we do, and the interface he proposes we have with the Department of Toxicology and other players in order to make our environment safe for everyone, including the people who would live at 2550 Irving Street. You'll see our plans, our compromise plans, which Tom Soper has created with Mike Garavaglia. And finally, all within 60 minutes, you'll hear about the future. And we're really at an inflection point. We have tried desperately to cooperate, to compromise, to have discussions with the Mayor's Office of Housing and the Tenderloin Neighborhood Development Corporation. And my fear is that all that attempt to bend over backwards has gotten us nowhere. And so we may have, there's a fork in the road here. This is an inflection point, and we'll talk about that. And we may have to file a complaint in court, and we will need your support if we go there even more than ever. So that's our intention for the next hour. Again, thank you for coming, and let's begin.
Just prior to passing it on to Supervisor Mar, I just wanted to let all the participants know this meeting is being recorded. So with that, Supervisor Mar, I'd ask you to unmute yourself and perhaps share some thoughts with us.
There it goes. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, just so great to see all of you. Hope everyone is starting to get a little bit more into the holiday spirit as we enter what will hopefully be a more enjoyable and holiday season this year compared to last year. And I really want to thank the MSNA, the Sunset Community Alliance, and Sunset Residents Association for all of your advocacy and organizing to preserve the wonderful quality of life that we all love here in the Sunset for many years, but especially over the past year, really focused on the 2550 Irving project. You know, I think we all know this has been at times a very contentious process, and that's really understandable given the significant new development, that it's a significant new development that will bring changes to the neighborhood. I did want to just, state again that I've been clear from the beginning, from when this project was first announced by the Mayor's Office and TNDC, that I am supportive, and I do believe this is exactly the kind of new housing that we need in the Sunset. It's housing that will create new opportunities in the neighborhood for working families who've historically been the heart and soul of our neighborhood, but who can no longer afford the astronomical housing prices and the high rents. But I've also been clear that it's important that this project be done right and with real neighborhood input and it be shaped by neighborhood input, and that the project, it really respects the character of our neighborhood and be appropriate. So I did want to make that clear, and I know there's been a wide range of perspectives over the past year in the neighborhood about the project. There's been a lot of support, for the project and maximizing the housing units, but clearly you guys, the neighborhood associations, and especially the residents immediately, who will be the immediate neighbors of the project, have expressed great concerns about many of the aspects of the original proposal. So that's one reason why when the board did approve the loan and the mayor's office of housing funding for the initial funding for the project in July. I did make a number of amendments to the mayor's resolution for the loan documents. The key one, I think, being that urging the mayor's office and TNDC to find an equitable balance between the need to maximize affordable housing, but also addressing the neighborhood concerns around height and bulk, and just the design of the project. So I have been, and I did want to say I really appreciate the work that the neighborhood association and SCA and SRA have done to create the alternative proposal. I think that's been an extremely constructive part of this process. And so I've been actively supporting the alternative proposal. You know, I've had multiple meetings directly with Mayor Breed, with her chief of staff, and of course with Eric Shaw and TNDC about it. And they have committed to meeting with the neighborhood associations about the alternative proposal before initiating the project at the planning department. So I know that the meeting is still in the process of being scheduled, and I really am doing everything I can to urge them to work with the neighborhood and make sure that this project does move forward successfully, but not just successfully for the neighborhood. So again, I want to thank everybody for all of your work on this, and I'll continue to be in close touch, with the leaders of the neighborhood associations, and helping to facilitate meaningful discussion with the mayor's office and TNDC about the compromise. And
Thank you, Supervisor Mar. Go ahead, please.
Ramesh, I also wanted to say I apologize. I had a prior commitment to attend an event in Chinatown that I'm going to have to leave for in about shortly, but Daisy Kwan from my staff will be able to stay for the entire meeting, and so that we can make sure that we're up to date on the perspectives and the plan from the neighborhood associations.
Thank you, Supervisor Mar. I hope you'll have like 5 minutes for questions. If folks have any questions for Supervisor Mar, please use the raise hand feature on Zoom. Supervisor Mar, I'll kick off while we just wait for those hands to show up. Given the amendments that you made in the Board of Supervisor as approval of the funding of the project about community engagement, and given recent feedback from TNDC and the Mayor's Office of Housing and Community Development that they have no incentive to offer any compromises here, will you go on record to say that the community engagement portion of that amendment is not being met?
Thank you. Thanks for unmuting me again, Ramesha. Yes, the amendment, the important amendment that I made to the board's resolution was unanimously supported by the board. Again, urging TNDC and the mayor's office to find an equitable balance between maximizing housing and addressing neighborhood concerns around height and bulk. So that was, and that was also approved by the mayor's office as well when we were working on the final amendments. So that's very important to me. And I'll continue to advocate for that.
Thank you, Supervisor Mar. Our first question comes from Isidore Rosenthal. Mr. Rosenthal, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Supervisor Mar, I was under the impression way back when the project was first announced, there would be recovered addicts who be provided housing, which is fine. But when I suggested that there ought to be some expertise available in the building to address any concerns, any people who feel like they're going back into a drug addiction, that they be there to assist them and help them stay recovered. And I was met with outrage, though I had asked an impertinent question. And I think it's still timely.
Yeah, well, just a quick response to that. I mean, just a clarification that like all new affordable housing developments that the city supports is funding right now, there's a requirement that around 20% of the units be set aside for formerly homeless residents. And this is part of our homeless, our strategy in creating housing, you know, to address the homelessness crisis. So 2550 Irving, like all new affordable housing developments, will include those units for formerly homeless residents. But it's not necessarily, or it's really not drug addiction, formerly homeless residents or even house residents that might be having drug addiction problems like so many are in our city. It's folks that were formerly homeless and need housing. And there's also a requirement that the developer and the operator of the housing provide services, support services on site to ensure that those residents, as well as all the residents in the building, are going to be able to be able to, you know, to live comfortably in the housing. So TNDC is committed to providing on-site staff for those residents and really for all residents, all the families and other residents in the building.
Thank you, Supervisor.
Yeah.
Okay, the next question is from Randy. Randy, I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself now.
Right, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Great, good morning, everyone. I live in the Sunset on 21st Avenue in Vicente. And I wanted to make a couple comments about what I think is really important, and that is the need for sunshine on our homes. This has been brought up a lot of times, I'm sure, but it seems to me that one of the most important elements for any architect when they're designing something is to take into consideration where the sun is shining. I mean, that's architecture 101 as far as I know. So when you bring up the sunshine issues, people start talking about a view, and I'm not talking about a view. What I'm talking about is this. Homes in the Sunset have been designed to capture the light from the south. The windows in my home on the south side go all the way to the ceiling so that the light coming into the light well will warm my house. Now, the other things that happen when your house is cast in shadow for the better part of the day, you get mold, dampness, no warmth. Your garden is useless. Your garden is useless. You're now in a shadow. And it costs you more to heat your home. It's not about a view. It's about some pretty practical issues. My question for you, Gordon, Supervisor Mar, is, has there been an analysis for the shadow that will be cast by this building? A detailed shadow, so the people who are affected by this building will know what's in store for them. Again, a detailed shadow analysis throughout the day, especially for the homes, obviously, on the north side of the building.
Thank you. Yeah, for unmuting me. Yeah, I'm sorry. I've been muting because there's some noise in the background here with my family. Yeah, Randy, TNDC did do a shadow study, and I think that was shared with MSNA and SCA and the other groups. I know there was some questions or concerns that the shadow study was inadequate, and but yeah, there was a shadow study that did show the expected shadow on the homes on the north side of the development at different times of the year, based on the 7-story original proposal. I would add that it's my understanding that there's really not the issues of shadows and shadow impacts of developments on the neighboring properties is not something that the Planning Commission and the planning department takes seriously as a when they make their decisions, unfortunately. And I'm not and then I think we're facing the further challenge with this project. Actually, I did want to mention in a lot of the new developments right now in the Sunset in the city, where they're taking advantage of these state laws that really override local decision making around land use. 2550 Irving is using the state density bonus that's allowing them to go three floors higher than our local than it's zoned for right now locally. And then they're also using SB 35, that Senator Wiener's state bill that allows for a streamlined process and removes a lot of requirements for discretionary review or appeals. So that SB 35 basically allows a project to be streamlined if as long as it meets the basic zoning guidelines of a city, which this one does. So that's a challenge we're facing here is we have these state laws that have removed a lot of opportunities for local input to shape development in our neighborhoods. I mean, I've been a strong vocal opponent to these efforts by the state government to override local zoning. I was a sponsor of the resolution that the board passed against Senator Wiener's SB 35 2 years ago. I sponsored the resolution supporting Senator Cortese's legislation that required full environmental review on toxic sites. So this is a challenge and with 2550 Irving and with a lot of projects.
Thank you, Supervisor Mar. Next question comes from Flo Kimmerly.
Thank you, Gordon. I want to respond to that very excellent question about shadow studies, which I know is available. Daisy just posted that it's available on a website. I have read that extensively. That shadow study indicates that 40 residences, 40 on the north, on the east, on the west, and a few on the south will be impacted with at least 1 hour of sun a day less at certain times of year. That's the least amount. So it's a major impact. The other thing I want to say, Gordon, is that we understand SB 35 is a hard one to knock, that state laws override local issues. But we also are asking you to stand with us, because a lot of this is just politics, is just putting pressure to bear in the right place at the right time, things you can do that we have not been able to do despite our very best efforts. We are asking you to stand with us, to support our compromise of 80 units, which we think is more than fair. We've always said we want this project. We just want it in harmony with the neighborhood so that it's a livable situation, both for the people who will be there and the neighbors that already exist. And I think you underestimate your power if you stand up and just say, this can't go to planning as it is. You have ignored hundreds and hundreds of residents. They don't even respond to me anymore when I email. They have shut us out. They are totally radio silent. We need you to stand up for us, please.
Thank you, Flo. Supervisor Mar, would you like to address that?
Yeah, again, I believe the compromise proposal, is a great alternative that's been presented. I appreciate all the work that you've done, and Tom Soper is here, who I know was kind of the lead on developing that. So I do very much support that. I'm doing everything I can to get the mayor's office and TNDC, to really sit down with you and have a real discussion about it. And that they did commit that they will do that. The overall timeline for the project has been delayed, as you know. I mean, back in the community meeting in September, they said they were planning to move this forward in October. So it's been delayed for a number of reasons, including consideration of the alternative proposal. Thank
you, Supervisor Mar. Our next question comes from Suwait. Sued Lau. Apologies if I mispronounced. Please unmute yourself. Okay. As we wait for Sued to unmute him, we're going to ask Nancy Lee to ask her question. Nancy Lee, go ahead.
Hi, Ramisha, this is Nancy. Just want to let you know when I go to the Chinese channel, I only hear English, just FYI.
Okay. Josephine, can you address that? Okay. Why don't we ask Sued? We'll come back on the interpretation question. Sued, please go ahead with your question, please.
Yes, thank you so much for unmuting me. Thank you, Supervisor Mar, for your support or your show of support to this group. We really appreciate that. One of the questions I have, and I own a building across the street from it, is that it's about this contamination. Well, if we don't know about it, we don't know about it. But the fact that we know about it and that the cleanup is haphazardly proposed and accepted, that's not going to do well with us. Because the tenants are going to sue us, the property value is going to decrease unless if this contamination is properly cleaned up in the future. So, and I don't know if as supervisor of our district, what you can do to help push the cleanup to the extent that it shouldn't be just 3 houses to the north or 3 houses to the south or whatever. It should be checked until that the soil or the air of the whatever particular area will show no more contamination. And that's to the extent that the boundary should be cleaned up. And so it shouldn't be so arbitrary that you just decide on 3 houses one way or the other, right? Not you, but whoever that proposed it. But so what advice will you give us homeowners in terms of how we can go from here in terms of pushing for the cleanup, for a proper cleanup, so that our property values, already is affected by this tall building. But let's hope that it's not affected also by the contamination, which would be a big deal to us.
Thank you, Sued. Supervisor Mar, I will unmute you if you are muted. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Sued, for raising the issue around the contamination in the soil at 2550 Irving and in the immediate neighborhood. This is an issue I know of great concern to all of you, and I know you're going to be discussing it more fully today, I think, with Lenny Siegel and others. And this is something that's very important for me as well as a district supervisor and as somebody that's been a long time environmental health and environmental activist. As you know, there are 2 other environmental oversight processes that the State Department of Toxic Substance Control are overseeing in the neighborhood. So there's, besides it with TNDC at 2550 Irving, there's also a separate process with the police credit union and also with a property owner, across the street on Irving. Because of the environmental analysis that was done on the 2550 Irving, that it was identified that there was another source of contamination across the street due to a former dry cleaner there. So this is a really serious issue with the contaminations that spread in the neighborhood, both at 2550 Irving and across the street. The DTSC and all the parties need to address it in a comprehensive way. And I'm going to continue to be very much focused on this and ensuring that the health and environment of the neighborhood is protected. And again, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to leave because I have to present something in Chinatown at 11, but Daisy Kwan from my staff will stay for the rest of the meeting. And I know there's going to be more discussion about the environmental contamination issues and protecting the health of the neighborhood. But thanks again, everyone.
Thank you, Supervisor Mar. Appreciate your participation today. Daisy, thanks for staying on. We will move on to our next speaker. I apologize if someone wasn't able to answer the question, but we will collate questions if needed via email. Josephine, would you please unmute so the Chinese translation can be also heard? I believe folks are having challenges on the Chinese channel. Okay, So our next speaker will be Paul Holzman, who has been focused very much on the concerning toxicity issues. Paul, I will be asking you to unmute yourself right now.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Well, that was quite a segue that Supervisor Mar left for us. Part of the problem is that we, what the supervising agency is doing is dividing the cleanup into several different parts. And Supervisor Mar used the word comprehensive, and that's exactly what we're trying to get the agency to do here, is look at it comprehensively so we can get the whole thing cleaned up. As many of you know, the 2500 block between 26th and 27th Avenue has a toxic plume of PCE beneath the surface, and that poses a threat to the current neighbors, a health threat to the current neighbors and the future neighbors. PCE is a dry cleaning fluid that causes cancer and diseases like Parkinson's. When it enters the ground, it spreads out in 100 feet direction, 100 feet in every direction, and then moves in the direction of the groundwater. And in this part of the Sunset, that means it moves north. The fumes from this can eventually enter a building or a home through the cracks in the foundation. Whenever you have a contaminated site that poses a health risk to people, you want to know three things. You want to know what it is, you want to know where it is, and you want to know how much there is. And you want to know this before you approve a plan to deal with it. But that's not what happened at 2550. In fact, the overseeing agency, the environmental state agency called DTSC, the Department of Toxic Substances Control, made their plan of how to deal with this PCE in a very fractured and piecemeal way, and without knowing the full spread of the PCE in the neighborhood, or its source, or the amount. So in early September, they told the developer, which is TNDC, that they could build on 2550 as long as they put down a vapor barrier to protect the residents from any fumes that would come up through the foundation. This meant that DTSC was giving them a pass on having to clean up the toxins under their property, which we know are there. For the neighbors, that's a problem because PCE under that building just doesn't stay there. It moves north into the neighborhood. And we think the data that we've seen backs this up. Every independent expert who has read the initial site investigation report believes that this investigation is incomplete, that there's not enough data there to really determine what's going on. And at the very least, what they say is that we need to see the data on indoor air quality in the neighborhood. So the MSNA has been pressuring the police credit union for months to do this, and we finally got them to agree to test 6 houses that are closest to the credit union. That took place in early September, and we were assured that they would be out, this information would be to us in a few weeks. But now we're in late November, and the homeowners who are wondering if they're breathing toxic fumes are still in the dark. A few days ago, I called DTSC to find out why this is taking so long to get this information, and they didn't know why. They now tell us that we should have the data sometime mid-January of next year. Now, to me, this is crazy and it's callous, and it illustrates another big problem with the process. When it comes to moving fast and expediting the building of this massively disruptive affordable housing project in this neighborhood, it's all about urgency. But when it comes to protecting the health of the neighborhood and the future residents, urgency is in short supply. TNDC, the police credit union, DTSC, and even the mayor's office are prioritizing this building over the health of the neighborhood. So I want to introduce our next speaker, Lenny Siegel, who's been advising MSNA since March on this, and he's the former mayor of Mountain View. He's currently the director of the Center for Public Environmental Oversight. He's not only a longtime environmental advocate, but also a housing advocate, and he knows how to do this right. Lenny was central in writing MSNA's criticism of TNDC's mitigation plan, and he recently published a report that outlines this whole process up to early September when DTSC made the decision to allow TNDC to go ahead with their plan. I'll put a link to it in the chat window, and I suggest everybody read it. It's really a well-needed outline. It's also on the MSNA website. Lenny recently met with the DTSC Deputy Director Grant Cope to discuss these issues that we're talking about now. And he's here to give us an update on the status of the 2500 block. So I think Lenny will be able to stay for a few more questions after he talks. Thank you.
Good morning. Good to see you all. I must say that just another introduction. My family has lived down at the other end of Irving Street by UCSF for more than 50 years. So I know the general area. So after the DTSC, Department of Toxic Substances Control, also known as DTSC, basically blew off the neighborhood's response to the TNDC response plan. I wrote my article and sent it to Grant Cope. I know Grant because he was formerly basically worked for Barbara Boxer in the US Senate. And I've worked with him on these kinds of issues and have had a couple phone calls with him. Now, these are unofficial, informal phone calls, so there's no absolute promise that they're going to do what I understood him saying on those calls. But he seemed to be positively responsive. But we're starting from the point where there are these three legal agreements which were negotiated independently for the same contamination. That is, there is a soil gas plume. This is PCE contamination in a gaseous form underground in this area. And it's one set of contamination, and there are three legal agreements that apply to it. And that makes it more difficult to get things done the way they should be done in the right order. So the things that Grant appears to have agreed to is the third site, the Albright cleaner site on the south side of Irving, only recently signed the voluntary cleanup agreement with DTSC. And that he agreed to accelerate the investigation of cleanup of that site, perhaps issuing a legal order to make that happen more quickly. And he expects as part of that there will be subsurface remediation, the kind of soil vapor extraction that Don Moore has talked about. This will be a positive thing, but it's not enough. The consultant for the police credit union has asserted that most of the contamination under the police credit union has come from Albright cleaners. That is possible, but no one has proven it. The contamination levels vary depending on where you are. And the way I read it, there are multiple sources. And in fact, there may have been, there is a police credit union parking lot on the south side of Irving, and that has high levels. Those high levels might be there because somebody went out there with a can of PCE and poured it on the ground. We don't know. The investigation has not been as thorough as it should have been. So anyhow, they've agreed to accelerate the investigation of the required of Albright cleaners. Secondly, because the sampling at the police credit union site has not determined where any leaks may have happened on the site, the consultant for the police credit union says that there were leaking sewer lines. Those could have been on the property or off the property or both. And Grant appeared to agree that they would either require or DTSC would fund and do itself subsurface sampling for soil gas after demolition of the building. That's critical. You need to know where the contamination is coming from if you're going to address it. And that would be good if they would do it. We'll see if it really happens, but that's something that to me is very important.
So Lenny, I'm
yeah.
sorry, I might need to cut you in just to say we can get some Q&A, and maybe you can provide some more information in that Q&A response. If anybody has a question for Paul or Lenny around the toxicity concerns, please raise your hand. I do see Christy Tam has a question.
But Ramisha, let me just ask Lenny, he wasn't quite finished with what.
I am so sorry, yes.
Yeah.
So I'll be quicker. So 2 points. One is that I asked them to make sure that the indoor air data is made available to the neighborhood. They do protect the privacy of people. They don't say so-and-so at this house had a problem, but it's important to, I'm assuming that some of the neighbors will want to give out the information. Is they should cooperate with the neighborhood so that the neighborhood knows what's going on. They haven't done enough indoor air sampling. They've only done in 6 houses, and the contamination could be moving in every direction. And finally, and this is part of the root of the problem, and it's to watch when we get the indoor air sampling, is the idea that they have an inadequate standard, basically a cancer risk level, which is not protective, that the consultants for PCU have been using, and that has to be basically you have to insist on the more protective standard, and perhaps sampling in the winter when the conditions may be worse. What actually happens, I think, will depend upon what they find in their sampling. There are legal things and all that, but if we find high levels of PCE in some of your homes, then you'll be in a strong position to make arguments that they should do more. If they find nothing, then it'll be a lot harder to make those arguments.
Thank you, Lenny. Christy, please proceed with your question. I will remind anyone who has a question regarding toxicity to please use the raise hand feature on Zoom. Christy, you are unmuted. Would you like to ask your question? Okay. Flo,
hello， 大家好。
Go ahead, please.
咁我由6月30號attend 嗰個 community meeting， 同埋今日個 meeting， 我一直聽到Gordon Mar 佢個 commitment 咧，就係佢完全係對我哋呢個社區咧係冇 commit 去幫我哋，將我哋嘅聲音發出去。佢就係一味淨係推卸責任，其實呢個項目咧係根本係未成熟去發展，好多答案咧，我哋啲居民咧都未得到個冇任何個回覆，亦都冇答案。佢個進展咧係非常之模糊。我哋甚至乎咧覺得咧，其實佢係
Josephine, I'm going to have to cut off the speaker because there isn't a question, and right now we're focused on toxicity. So I'm going to ask Jean Barish to ask her question.
Thank you very much. I wonder if you could be a little more specific. You said there were some things that are being done, and you also said that there were some things that need to be done, the additional air sampling indoors and changing the standard of toxicity to be at a higher threshold. Are there other pieces of this that are missing also that need to be done that haven't been?
Well, there's the need for subsurface sampling on the police credit union site to determine the source. There is a need for a second round of sampling for indoor air in the homes that they're already sampling. There is a need to look at this whole site, the whole edge of the site, and do soil gas and indoor air sampling, both. They've only sampled to the north. Paul talked about the direction of groundwater. What's more important here is that soil gas moves in every direction. So if there's soil gas emanating from either dry cleaner site, you have to go sample on all basic in the neighborhood until you don't find any PCE. And that's something that's missing. Part of it has to do with the legal authorities that they use for this. There's a voluntary cleanup program, and that's really good, helpful if you're trying to address a site that you're trying to redevelop. it doesn't help the neighborhood very much. And this is the kind of thing where you folks have been fairly effective. You know, they claim that the indoor air sampling is voluntary, that Police Credit Union doesn't have to do it under the legal agreement. Well, that's a bad legal agreement, but at least they're doing that, but they aren't doing enough.
So a lot of it is the sampling problems at this point.
Well, they should be committing to doing the cleanup, but hopefully the sampling will show us enough to make a bit stronger argument for actually doing cleanup. In the policies of DTSC, they have a preference for permanent cleanup. Instead, at this site, they're only promising to do mitigation, which is good. You know, design the building so the fumes don't come up into the building. But they really should be doing cleanup, and that's what the neighborhood asked for, and they were totally blown off. And the excuse for that was the inadequate, unprotective exposure standard that they chose to use. And that exposure standard, you know, is squishy in the sense that the documents say you should have a cancer risk. The term is excess lifetime cancer risk of 1 in a million. And they chose to use 1 in 10,000. And they legally can kind of get away with that, but it's really not preferred and generally not done.
Thank you, Lenny. Thank you, Jean. Our next question comes from Bill Kwan. Bill, please go ahead. Bill, you're on mute. Please unmute and ask your question.
Unmute. Can you hear me now?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Okay. My question is this. Now, let's say that they find that Albright is the source and the contamination is worse than what had been imagined. Would they clean up the site? And then I have a second question. Now, they found low levels of vinyl chloride, which is more of a potent carcinogen than PCE. And I think sometime later on, they stopped monitoring for VC or vinyl chloride. Are they going to routinely monitor for VC when they do all the other analysis?
When they do the sampling, they actually sample for a suite of chemicals, including PCE, TCE, and vinyl chloride. PCE has 4 chlorines, trichloroethylene. TCE has 3, vinyl chloride has 1. So it's part of the breakdown process. So they'll be sampling for it. Usually you don't find vinyl chloride actually going up into buildings because it's essentially heavier than the PCE and TCE. So PCE seems to be the chemical, you know, like when they've sampled inside the credit union, that's of the greatest concern. But they will be, if they're sampling, they'll have to sample for all of them. So that's not something I'm worried about. The question is, where are they going to sample?
Thank you, Lenny. Our next question comes from Lucy Kung. Lucy, please go ahead.
I have a question in terms of this. So with, you know, how can we encourage them to do more sampling around the neighborhood? I mean, is this something a community effort to ask for that? Or, you know, how can we get a comprehensive report?
Yes, it's worth asking for. The question is at what time. You might want to wait until you get the indoor air samples from the 6 houses. Basically, it'll be a stronger argument if you find high levels at those 6 houses to sample more houses. If they find nothing and they can prove it, then it's a less effective argument. But they will be starting a new process for the Albright Cleaners site. So they should be going to the public for the Albright Cleaners investigation. And that will be an opportunity, particularly for the people who live adjacent to that site or close to it, to ask for sampling off-site. It may be difficult given the nature of the cleanup agreements, but you folks were successful in getting them to do some sampling at north of PCU that supposedly wasn't required by the inadequate cleanup agreement.
Thank you, Lenny. Josephine, any questions from our Chinese audience? Okay. I appreciate everyone for their questions around the toxicity. We do have a little bit more content to focus on, so we're going to move it to our next speaker.
Can I make one final comment? I work with communities all over the country on these kind of issues. It's half technical and half political. You know, just what you do. I mean, what I tell people when I go to their living rooms in North Carolina or Wisconsin or whatever is the #1 factor in determining whether you're going to get a cleanup is the fact that you're in this room.
That's fairly important for us to remember, Lenny, that all of us need to continue to make sure that the technical analysis as well as the political machine keeps working in favor of our overall health interests. So we appreciate that reminder. Our next speaker is Joan Klau. Joan, I will be asking you to unmute. I know we have a little bit of time left, so Joan, I'm going to ask you to keep your comments to 5 minutes, please. Thank you.
Can I share screen?
Yes,
really quick?
You have that ability.
All right. So I have been asked to share, make sure that I am sharing, an update on key events since our last meeting. And I know this looks like a big list. I'm not going to talk to all of it. I'm going to leave it up and you can read what you want to read. And I'm just going to call out the highlights. So let me just make this, well, I'll just, sorry. One thing, so our last meeting, June 30th, but one thing that got lost is right 2 days before, the Budget and Legislative Analyst Office published an audit of the MOHCD. Sorry, I am.
You need to go to slideshow and not presenter view.
Yeah, hang on a second, sorry.
Okay.
Just slideshow, thank you. And so am I still sharing?
You are not sharing.
I am sharing?
You are not sharing. But keep your comments up.
Okay. Sorry.
Joan, if you want to just make the comments without sharing the screen, that's also fine.
Okay. So Budget and Legislative Analysts, they published MOHCD's audit that Supervisor Mar asked for. And I strongly recommend you go and Google and read it because it cites several ways that the NOFA for this project was flawed and exemplifies MOHCD's lack of standards. So I just kind of wanted to pull that out. But next up was, then we got to meet with Mayor Breed, and I was in the meeting. She heard presentations on toxins, the design general plan, and meeting got cut short before we got into finances. But I will just say that the thing that struck her the most, I noticed, was the toxins. And she, the other important thing to note was that she gave us Andrea Bruce, her Deputy Chief of Staff, who has remained in contact with us throughout. And so that was an important connection that got made in that meeting. Next up, I'm sure you have heard that the Budget Committee, they met, Mar did propose to table advancing the loan until after DTSC approved the plan, but he was outvoted by his fellow supervisors, Haney and Safai. So it did go to the board and they did vote to approve it, but I do want to call out two important amendments that he did add. One, the sale being contingent on DTSC's approval of the toxin plan, which Lenny just talked about, and also the resolution urging TNDC and MOHCD to work with the community on compromise solutions. And that's really important for this next series of, these are the amendments, you can Google them, but this is important because then DTSC, we just heard about, and so I'm not gonna go over it. There's small children trying to get in the room, but the next important step was a financial consultant at the national level who works with and knows the financial expert who will probably most likely be preparing TNDC's tax credit applications. And so he knows the playing field here. He knows the rules and what they're going to be going after and what they can get. And he reviewed, all along TNDC has been saying to us, this project can't pencil out for less than 7 stories and 98 or 99 units. But that's not true. The financial consultant determined that 80 units is the minimum that is viable for the funds and competitive unit count that they're going after. And so based on that, the compromise design that Tom's going to talk about in just a moment, that began its work. And so this next schedule here, green is us trying to push forward our compromise designs, and red is us meeting opposition. And then just last 2 little things are that in office hours, we discovered that from TNDC that the cost, I'm on the phone right now, that the costs are up to $120 million in costs now. And that's likely due to a proposal to add underground parking for 20, upgrading it from 11 spaces to 20. So that's a lot of money for 10 more parking spaces. And then lastly, Tom might talk about this, but TNDC's NOFA response, we discovered, oh, Bunny, there's no candy and I'm on the phone. Sorry, folks.
Joan, do you want to, we can always come back to this takeaway.
This is the last thing. It's just that the TNDC's NOFA response said that D Forward, who they cited as supporting 7 stories, their letter was actually only for 4 stories. And TNDC subsequently went back and asked them not to publish that, but now we know about it. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tom to talk through the compromise design, because that's where we are right now. And that's what we're pushing hard for. 2 tracks, toxins and the compromise design. So
thank you, Joan. Please stop screen sharing. Tom, I will share my screen and I will remind you, you have 5 minutes and then we'll go to Q&A. Give me 1 second. Let me get Tom. Tom, please unmute yourself. There we go.
Okay, so this is the heart of the conversation, a compromise proposal. As I walk you through these slides, keep in mind that I have made a design to reduce the building from 7 stories to effectively a 5-story building. So those of you talking about sunshine issues, a 2-story reduction is a huge improvement, although it's still a compromise. Right now, the zoning ordinance allows for 4 stories, but the bonus from the state allows them to go up 3 stories. So if we achieve this 5-story building effectively, that will be a huge improvement. But I want to walk you through these. Let's go back to that first slide.
Tom, we have 5 minutes, so just let's focus on the design perhaps.
Yeah, okay, fine. So next slide. Okay, so this is what the city lacks. It has no plan to distribute housing throughout the Sunset District. Next slide. And we need to understand that we need to compare apples to apples. These 3 projects that you see right here are for supportive family housing. And these are the most intensive in terms of generating traffic service and needs for families. This is something that the city and MOCAD does not recognize. Next slide. This is not supportive housing. However, it informs us. The Shirley Chisholm Affordable Housing Project has smaller units. It has underground parking. Why can't our project have this type of thing? Next slide. This is the senior citizen affordable housing on Gary. And of course, this is a 7-story building, but when you compare it to our project, it has much more space in front of it. It has Gary Boulevard that allows a taller building to be built in that particular location. Next slide. But this is the reality of our project at 2550. It's 240 feet long by 90 feet on the east and 60 feet on the west. and it blocks the sun, as everyone knows, to the neighbors to the north. You can see the commercial district in yellow to the east, and there is an incredible gridlock phenomenon that occurs when you intensify supportive family housing at this location. Next slide. And this takes you down to the ground level. The three areas where this overconcentration is going to create chaos is at the entrance to the building to accommodate 99 families at one entrance, and also at location B to address the refuse needs of these 99 families at one location. That's a very intensive thing. You have the services that will be delivered. You will have the grandmothers and grandfathers that visit these 99 families, and then you have the concentration on the intersection at 26. Next slide. So this is a visual example of that gridlock that we experience daily that is being ignored by the city because they claim that SB 35 doesn't require them to follow CEQA guidelines. Next slide. So Joan was talking about the magic formula when it comes to penciling things out, and we engaged a financial consultant to find out what he thought the bottom line was to make this project fundable. So we're proposing to reduce it to 80 units from 99. And I did a comparison to fulfill all those funding requirements. Next slide. But what is really lacking is how you tie this project into the neighborhood, how you knit it and make it feel a part of the neighborhood. And this is an example locally to draw upon. Next slide. This is the ground level of the developer scheme. And whenever you see a red dot in the upper left-hand corner, that's the developer scheme that you're looking at here. But he has several functions that are antithetical to creating a residential feel along this street frontage, like parking and storage and the like. And the backyard issue, that where you see the backyard, that will be in permanent shadow 12 months out of the year. That is no place for children to be. Next slide. So this is in the blue dot, it indicates the compromise proposal at the ground level. What I've done is that I've relocated the parking to the center of the site that actually takes advantage of the shadowy backyard for parking and gets that parking away from the intensity of the intersection at 26th and Irving. But I've also brought the housing unit shown in the gold color along the street to animate it and make it more residentially friendly. Next slide. This is actually a shallow basement area below the entrance to service. This came out of the comments that the developer made about how they need to function. And so this would also address partially the proper way to remediate the contamination in part, but also to correlate it to the rest of the design of the building. Next slide. So this is a typical floor that the developer proposed. What I want to explain to you is that the numbers in the gold boxes that you see represent a 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, or 3-bedroom unit. But these are all organized along a double-loaded corridor, much like a hotel is, but a 200-foot corridor without natural light is something that I really can't correct. But what I can do is to reduce the numbers of this. Next slide. So what I propose on floors 2 through 3 is a minor adjustment for the kinds of units to meet the funding guidelines, and I've reoriented the vertical circulation stack. Next slide. And then on floors 4 through 5, no changes to their design and flipping around the vertical circulation stack. Next slide. But the big change in terms of livability is that this is the roof. And you can see that there is half of a 6-story there that actually steps back from the north, allowing the building to perform as if it's a 5-story building, only 1 story above the zoning height limits as it reads today, but also providing a green space for a playground for kids to have direct access to the sun and for adults to have direct access to the sun, to enjoy the view to the north where Golden Gate Park is. Next slide. So this is a side-by-side comparison of a massing diagram that my associate architect, Garavaglia Architecture, did for me. On the left is the 7-story massing and how it really is colossal within this residential scale and is contrary to the general plan and is being ignored by the city. On the right, you see essentially the 5-story building with a penthouse, making it a 6-story with the step back, and how much more reasonable that is. And this has legal precedent to propose compromises when there are environmental concerns here. But basically, the housing on the left is housing without dignity. The housing on the right is housing with greater dignity. Next slide. So in summary, time and your involvement is of the essence, because 2550 will not be ready for occupancy until 2025. It points to the fact that these large buildings are really inappropriate. Also, 2550 will be built out of concrete and steel because of its height at a cost of $1 million per unit, which is way out of line. Number 3, we need to have faster, multiple sustainable methods, inclusive of vacancies in our district, using city land, not massive towers, housing families without dignities. And that's what I'm working with Supervisor Mar on to adopt my process for the district. So we need to reset the city's emergency trajectory from its lack of vision on the west side by caring about what happens at 25 Irving, because it's San Francisco's Gettysburg, quite frankly, and we need to step up and correct this trajectory. So that's the end of my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions.
As always, I'll remind folks, if you have questions, to please raise your hand and we will call upon anyone with a question. Josephine, please let us know if there's any questions from the Chinese speaking audience as well. Tom, while we wait for the questions to come through, one from me, what has been the response of TNDC and PIATOC? Because obviously these alternate designs have been shown to them. What has been their response thus far?
So their response has been radio silence. And I have been in close connection with Gordon on this very point. And I think that his talk this morning addresses the imperative that he needs to drive home the intent and the meaning of the amendment that he wrote.
Thank you very much, Tom. Flo, you have a question. Please go ahead. Please unmute.
Thank you. I just want to make a suggestion, since time is running thin and Joan and Robert have a very short presentation, that we hold questions until after Joan finishes.
Okay,
and then take them.
Sure. Robert, you have the floor. I am asking you to unmute. Please unmute. Thank you. Go ahead, Robert.
All right. Well, my name is Robert Ho, and I'm a property owner in the neighborhood. Like you, my family and I will be directly affected by this project. I want to start by thanking Tom for explaining with great clarity the very, very reasonable compromise design that has been submitted to MOCD and TNDC. This is an example of how we, as members of the immediate neighborhood around 2550 Irving Street, have always strived to provide a reasonable resolution to this issue. The proponents of this project have tried to portray us as selfish NIMBYs who don't care about other people less fortunate than us. But this isn't true. We support building more affordable housing, but we feel affordable housing should be built in a responsible way. One that reflects the size and density of the existing homes surrounding the site, and not an excessively tall 7-story building on Irving Street that spans the entire block of 26th Avenue, 27th Avenue. We support smaller scale affordable housing because we in San Francisco have learned from past experience that this is the model that promotes livability and dignity for low-income tenants. We understand that smaller scale affordable housing is not the most profitable model for developers, but we do not support building massive, maximum density, low-income housing because they over-concentrate families and negatively affects those families in the neighborhood. The results of our recent door-to-door survey of the immediate neighborhood showed that over 60% of the households are opposed to the 2550 Irving Street project as designed. However, of the 60%, 2/3 of the households would support a more reasonably sized project that is 4 stories and 50 units. The proponents of the 2550 Irving Street project believe that they have a right to build this project to maximum allowable density and height, without regard to the legitimate concerns of the immediate neighborhood residents. They say the state mandate from Sacramento gives them this right, and they are determined to fast track their version of affordable housing and force it upon the neighborhood. But I remind everyone that the residents in the immediate community have rights too. We have a right to have a say regarding the future of our neighborhood, and also to require that any new affordable housing development must be in accordance with the city's general plan. And it must pass the test of just pure common sense and reason. We have a right to require that the toxic contamination, given the levels that were discovered, is addressed in a responsible manner for the future tenants, for the existing surrounding residents, and also for the construction workers who will be building the project. The urgency to build this project should not stand in the way of a responsible plan to address the toxic contamination problem. We have the right to expect that public funds earmarked for affordable housing are spent in a fiscally responsible manner and not spent based on the very expensive proposal submitted by TNDC for this project. The city approved TNDC's proposal despite the fact that it was the only proposal received by the city in response to the notice of funding availability in 2019. Chances are you wouldn't even remodel your own kitchen based on just receiving one proposal. Here's the point. When our rights as a community have been disregarded, despite our unwavering opposition during the past year, including our submission of the very reasonable compromise design, we will have no other choice but to prepare for legal action. At this time, we intend to direct our attorney to prepare a complaint asking for a court injunction to be issued to halt the progress of the project. It has finally come down to this point, and we need the entire community support to make it happen. Give whatever you can afford, be it $50, $300, or $500 a month, but please give. We may not have the financial advantage that the city or the TNDC has, but there are many of us, and we will all be affected by this project. You'll be receiving an email from us informing you of the various ways to contribute to this legal fund. Together, we can stand united against this injustice and assert our rights as a community to have a say in the future of our neighborhood. Thank you so much for your involvement.
Thank you, Robert. Steve Ward, I do see your hand. I'm going to call on you in just 1 second. Joan is just going to give us a closing statement. And Randy, I see your hand as well. Joan, go ahead, please. I'm going to ask you to unmute. Go ahead.
Thanks. I'm going to try to share screen one more time just to give you.
Joan, in interest of time, we only have a minute or so left, so I want to make sure we
Okay.
get the questions as well.
So I'm going to give you a quick update on where we stand with funding in terms of both the expenses to date and funds raised. So since February, we have spent an average, give or take, of $6,800 a month in legal fees. We are holding another $2,500 aside to pay our architectural consultant fees to Garavalia. And we've got about another 700 or so in miscellaneous administrative fees for, we finally incorporated Zoom and live event fees. So how do we pay those bills? It's from the community. In April, we started a GoFundMe and it's raised about $11,000 from outside of the board. There are some board members who contributed through that as well, but outside 11,000. And then there have been some very generous checks dropped off to the two different treasurers. So thank you for those. So outside of the board, we've raised about $16,000 out of the $75,000 that we expect to be paying through November. The balance, 59,000, has come from the board members themselves. And that's a core group of, on any given month, about 12 families who have pledged to contribute monthly to cover the bills in amounts ranging from $100 to $400 to $800 up to a very generous $1,000 a month. In those months that we have no low or outside donations, we do work with our lawyer to cut back his hours as much as we can. And do legal legwork for him ourselves. And it's been a long, tedious road of research, negotiations, documentation, and it might not seem like there's much to show for it yet, but all of those hours, these last months, have been spent building a case for compromise. And that is where we are now. We're also documenting everything along the way in anticipation of going to court. And when we go to court, I will be honest with you, it will likely double our expenses in those months. Not every month, but in those months. And if that sounds crazy to you, I understand it would, but I want to break it down for you. In a typical month, our lawyer bills about 24 hours. It's about 3 days worth of work in a given month. When we go to court, he's going to spend about 3 more days a month just to file to go to court, to be in court, and to be filing responses. And so the board recommends and is preparing to approve our next options to go to court. We know how the community feels from Robert's door-to-door work, but we need to know what kind of financial support we can expect from beyond the board. So I know the holidays are a hard time to be asking for this, but I am asking, if all you can do is a one-time donation, please do it as soon as possible. We would be ever so grateful to be building up those funds in preparation to pull the trigger. But if it fits your budget better to pledge a monthly donation, that's fine. That's how we operate. Just send me or Joan Barcan an email with your monthly pledge, and we'll just add you to our monthly email reminding you, hey, the bill has come and we'd like your monthly donation to help pay the bill. I'm going to go one step further and just put a goal out there. For the next 3 months, that's going to be our busiest months now going to court. Our goal is to find 10 families who would be willing to contribute $50 to $100 a month. We'd like to find another 10 families who would contribute at the board's mid-range point of $400 a month. And our big stretch goal is 10 families who would match our top board member donation of $1,000 a month. That would give us the extra moral support and financial support to confidently tell our lawyer, let's go, let's do this. We've been building this case, let's do it. So that's what we're asking for. And I know that we've been dropping in chat, and we'll follow up in an email with the 3 different ways. You can drop checks payable to us. We're now incorporated. Zelly app is no fees, no fees, and it's really easy. GoFundMe is there. It does take a percentage, so we kind of prefer if you do the check or the Zelly. But and then if you're willing to do a monthly pledge for the next 3 months, please do email us. I'll drop the treasurer's email addresses in chat. So thank you,
Joan. Steve Ward, please go ahead with your question.
Okay, well, this is really a question, or maybe several questions for Tom. I really wanted to go about
Steve,
And
your audio is a little intermittent. Perhaps-
Okay,
Yeah, try again, please.
okay, are you hearing me now?
Yes.
Okay, so I want to start with this, Tom. In view of the fact that San Francisco is the most dense city other than Manhattan, isn't it true that we've already shouldered our burden as far as density is concerned? That's one question. The other question I have is, isn't it true that by using some of the 16 million square feet of empty office space
Steve, you've cut out again. Tom, I think you had the gist of the questions. Would you like to address? I'm going to ask you to unmute. Perhaps the second question is more relevant for our
Yeah.
audience.
Yes. So Steve and the audience, there is a difference of opinion, and it's split between MOCAD, the mayor's office, and actually a growing number of Board of Supervisors as to that point. MOCAD and the mayor's office believes that the state laws of increasing density throughout our city prevail and are valid. We disagree, I think, and a growing number of Board of Supervisors disagree, and certainly this community disagrees. And what I am doing personally to reverse this trajectory, and that's what I said in my talk on the compromise design, to look closer at my affordable housing process for D4, to have more of a diversified approach and sprinkling of this population throughout the district in those opportunity sites that make sense, because this process that MOCAD is ramrodding down our throats is traumatic.
Thank you so much, Tom. I have a question from Isidore Rosenthal. Mr. Rosenthal, if you would like to unmute and ask your question. You do have to unmute, Mr. Rosenthal. There you go.
Yes, I just need the mailing address for Joan Barkan.
We will add it to the chat.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from our audience? We really appreciate you staying back till 20 past the hour, but there's so much content. Nancy, I believe you have a question. I'll ask you to unmute. Go ahead.
Hi, I've got a question for Tom. Tom, is it my understanding that there's a cutoff time in which funding has to take place? And is that like February or March of 2022? And if so, what are our plans to either delay it or to kill the project?
Tom, I'll ask you to unmute yourself. Thank you.
Okay, so the answer to that is that we are working with our attorney to delay any way we can, but the thrust is to focus on the compromise design and to force TNDC and MOCAD to negotiate on the compromise design that I have designed and with the assistance of Garavaglia Architecture. That is going to take up more time. The closer that we get to February, as you said, that will put the project into another funding cycle. And then we hope to add a layer of the contamination issues. We just had a conversation with an environmental attorney yesterday by the name of Richard Drury, who has given us some new insights into how to try to get this site onto the Cortese list. So all of these things are working in tandem, and we're working closely with our attorney to push this out, and we believe that finally we have Gordon Mar on our side to drive this wedge into the mayor's plan.
Thank you so much, Tom. Randy, you have a question. Please go ahead and unmute. Go ahead, Randy.
Right. Question is for Tom. Tom, would a 4-story with a little 5th-story stubby 5th-story work?
Yes, it would. But what we're compromising on is the midpoint between their objective of 7 stories. So 5.5 is halfway between, and that represents a compromise. The other challenge, though, is that our financial consultant, as of this day, is saying that we have to supply 80 units to make the project pencil out and be attractive to receive state funding. So that means 5.5 stories. Now, there could be a circumstance that comes up with greater financial analysis that we might be able to whittle that down, but that's several steps out.
Thank you, Tom. Last call for any questions. Josephine, would you let us know if the Chinese-speaking audience has any questions? Okay, Josephine. A thumbs up if there are any questions. If not, we will conclude. Okay, so I don't think there are any questions from the Chinese speaking audience. So once again, I thank everyone for their time on a Saturday morning. I hope you found the information that we shared today useful. Many thanks to all of our speakers and to Supervisor Mar for joining and pledging their support to our alternative and compromise proposal. And then, not to beat a dead horse, but your continued support both in these community events and writing to the political machinery, as well as financial support, is what keeps this project and our efforts going. And we absolutely, it would have been great if we didn't have to rely on private contributions to do TNDC's work for them, PIATOC's work for them, and the Mayor's Office of Housing's work for them, because we do pay enough in taxes already. But since they aren't doing that effort, we need the private contributions to keep this going. And so please pledge, please support our effort, and we hope to engage with you all very soon. If nothing else, have a great weekend and have a great holiday next week. Take care, everyone.